The air in Winterfell was perpetually cold, even in the height of summer, as though the stones themselves remembered a time when frost and steel were the only certainties. For Bran Stark, now in his 12th named winter, this chill was as familiar as the pulse of his own heart. He lay upon the wolfskins in his chamber, where once he had dreamed of riding summer wind upon his brother's horses. Now his world had narrowed to the pale light of torches on walls, and the soft whispers of Maester Luwin at his elbow. He had never felt the sweet burn of muscle beneath his skin, nor the ache of arms tugging at reins. When he fell from the weirwood tower that autumn day, the maesters declared him broken beyond repair, an immobile freight of bones and sorrow. Yet in that stillness, new senses unfolded. He heard the distant cry of a raven, echoing beyond the walls. He felt the thrum of life pulsing through roots deep beneath Winterfell's foundations. His spirit, grounded where his legs would have carried him, became an anchor for the house he loved. It was Lady Catelyn who first saw the change. Though her eyes were rimmed with worry and the endless turmoil of southern politics, she noted how Bran would close his eyes and smile as the old gods murmured in his mind. He no longer wept for lost days of flight with Robb, her eldest, fierce as summer lightning, and often he would urge her, voice soft as the hush of snowfall, to bring Sansa and Arya to his side. He had questions for them, questions that spoke of shadows beyond the wall, and currents of destiny, intertwining houses and men. Robb, newly proclaimed Lord of Winterfell, bore his responsibilities like a sword-worn cloak, proud, heavy, sometimes ragged at the edges. He struggled to find joy in the victory tournaments that replaced morning rides, yet he came daily to see Bran, sharing tales of the camp beyond Moat Cailin, of banners snapping in the northern wind. Rickon, the youngest, shadowed Bran in the Godswood, pressing small, awkward questions. Did Wolf's Wood lie haunted? Were old Nan's tales true? And Bran, with infinite patience, would stroke Rickon's dark curls and speak of bargains struck in moonlight, of heartbeats woven into the weirwood's roots. Yet it was in the crypts, where ancestors sat in cold vigil, that Bran's new path became undeniable. One moonless night, he slipped from his chamber on Luwin's lifted pallet, and with the help of gentle hands, was laid before the seated effigy of Brandon the Builder. The silence there was profound, untouched by breath or heartbeat. In that void, Bran felt the distant beat of an ancient heart, a rhythm older than any Stark, echoing through stone and memory. He did not fear it. Rather, he welcomed its murmurings like an old friend's counsel. When Luwin found him, pale as ivory and trembling, the maester spoke soft words of concern. But Bran's eyes shimmered with unspoken revelation. The wall of stone has ears, he told him, and beneath it lies a door only the quiet can open. Luwin frowned, but Bran's conviction trembled the maester's rational mind. After that night, more often than not, Luwin would find a small scrap of new parchment at Bran's side, inked with half-formed maps of Winterfell's ancient crypt passages, and notes about airflow in hidden recesses, tangible proof that Bran's spirit had stretched beyond his crippled frame. As winter's shadows lengthened, a cloak of unease descended on the castle. Rumors of wilding stirrings beyond the wall reached Maester Luwin's chambers, faint echoes at first, but then a surge of fear when a slain Night's Watch deserter was found deep in the Wolf's Wood, clawed and frozen. Robb sent riders north. Ashera Reed pledged her bow. Even Lord Karstark stilled his harsh tongue to watch the skies for omens. But Bran's attention shifted beyond the wall. It was there, in the whispering ice, that the threads of his vision converged. On a morning glazed with frost, Bran called for his siblings in the Godswood. Sansa arrived, her hair like spun gold in the weak sun, and Arya fierce and restless as a winter gale. They gathered around him, listening as he spoke of pale shapes, drifting on the winds beyond the night fort, of ravens black as spilled ink perched on broken towers, and of a voice, his own voice, calling him across the great frost to learn a craft older than sword or crown. "My place is here," he said, voice clearer than ever. "Yet they beckon me to step softly through the lands of ice, where no man walks by steel." His slender hand pointed north, where the sky shimmered with unheard songs. The sisters exchanged glances, Sansa's fraught with dread, Arya's alight with unspent wonder. For Bran, the walls of flesh meant nothing now. His journey would be measured in truths gleaned, not leagues traveled. It was then that a raven landed at their feet, a letter tied to its leg. Robb's seal, a direwolf in steel blue, pressed into gray wax. Bran's name whispered itself upon the wind, and Sansa broke the seal. Bran, we ride beyond the wall at dawn. Eddard Stark's counsel and Cregan Stark's steel await your guidance. The words burned like fire in Bran's chest. No longer would he be the boy left behind. His insight, born of stillness, had become as vital as the sword in Robb's hand. Lady Catelyn arrived in the Godswood, breath puffing in silver clouds. She stood before Bran, tears mingling with relief. "My son," she said, voice trembling like a leaf in the storm. "What path you choose, Winterfell stands with you." Bran inclined his head, pale hair gleaming in the faint morning light. In that moment, he was no mere crippled boy. He was the pivot upon which the fate of North, and perhaps all of Westeros, would turn. That night, Bran slept not. The moon was a sliver in the sky, and the cold pressed hard against the walls. In his dreams, he walked the bones of the world, through endless forests of ice, among whispering shades of kings and wolves. He felt the pulse of the old forest in his veins, and tasted the language of the children of the forest upon his tongue. When dawn came, he rose with purpose, his heart steady as the weirwood's trunk. At first light, in the courtyard ringing with the harnessing of horses and the final packing of arms, Bran was carried forth on a litter carved of oak and bound with iron. Robb stood beside him, blade tipped with frost, as Maester Luwin handed Bran a map inked with ancient runes. The clans of the Night's Watch, loyal men sworn to guard against the dark, formed an escort. Swords were drawn, horns sounded, and House Stark's banners fluttered. White direwolves leaping over fields of gray, before Bran, silent as stone, set forth on a journey that no man could walk. Beyond the castle gates, the quiet lay thick as wool. Bran's eyes closed, and he reached out with a mind unbound, feeling the tread of wolves, the shimmer of distant water, and the slow drift of snowflakes upon the wind. Each breath was a link in a chain that bound him to the world beyond. As the litter moved, the Godswood faded into memory, and Bran embraced the stillness, knowing that only through stillness could he see the paths ahead. Thus began the turning of a page older than blood or crown, a tale of a boy who never walked again, yet who would stride where no foot had trod, carried by the currents of fate and guided by the hushed counsel of ancient trees. And as the wall's shadow fell across their company, a new chapter of Stark history was written. One shaped not by sword but by vision, where the immovable heart of Winterfell would beat beyond its ramparts, echoing through ice and time. A-O-N-D. The wall's icy crown loomed above Bran's small company like a silent judgment, its frozen ramparts etched in pale twilight as dawn crept over the wasteland. The wind carried a biting tang of snow and stone, and Bran felt it as a call to deeper stillness, each breath a tether to the living world. Around him, the brothers of the Night's Watch, tall men in black cloaks, faces set like forged iron, prepared horses and supplies for the trek north. Robb Stark rode at Bran's side, his gray cloak flaring with every exhalation, eyes alight with the twin fires of duty and fear. They passed under the great gate, its wooden beams heavy with frost, and Bran closed his eyes to feel the pulse of the wall's cold heart. It spoke not in words but in echoes. Hollow, distant, as if the ancient stones remembered the footfalls of giants. For a moment, Bran sensed the vastness of time pressing in. Centuries of watchers, of battles fought and long forgotten, of oaths sworn beneath the starless sky. He clutched the map Maester Luwin had drawn, the ink still faint, and traced with a trembling finger the hidden passages, loopholes in the wall's armor that only knowledge and silence could open. Their guide was Corin Halfhand, a grizzled ranger whose missing hand was rumored to have been lost in a duel beneath the wall's shadow. He was a man of few words, lean as a knife's edge, and his eyes held secrets sharper than Valyrian steel. When he looked at Bran, it was not pity he saw, but purpose. A boy who had learned to see beyond his broken flesh. "The true crossing waits beyond the three towers," Corin rumbled, voice low as a dying fire. "You'll need all your wits, lad. The wall's catacombs shift with the seasons." At Bran's nod, they pressed on. The road narrowed, hemmed by jagged cliffs and frozen streams, until it dissolved into a white expanse where even the horses' hoofprints disappeared within heartbeats. Robb rode ahead, bow at his back, scanning the horizon for movement. Arya and Rickon, cloaked against the cold, huddled on Bran's litter, curious eyes burning with the same fierce wonder that had driven their brothers south. Sansa remained behind, her journey stalled by concerns for Winterfell's safety, but she sent Maester Luwin's promise to watch over Catelyn's domain until Bran's return. Bran let the wind play at his hair, its crystalline fingers urging him onward. He reached out with his mind, feeling the weave of life beneath the frost. The slow crawl of direwolves tracking scent beyond the wall. The tremor of a mammoth herd buried in ancient ice. The faint heartbeat of something older still, lurking in hidden caves. It was as though the world had peeled back its veil, inviting Bran to step through. And though his legs lay unused, his spirit traveled freely. At the foot of the wall's great face, Corin halted. There, in a cavernous fissure half concealed by icicles, was a carved archway whose stones bore the weathered runes of the first men. "Hira," Corin said. "The tunnel never closes, but its doors open only to those who know the old words." He recited syllables like the gasp of cold breath, guttural, ancient. The archway shimmered, as if the ice itself had liquefied, revealing a narrow passage sloping into darkness. Bran leaned forward, heart thundering with anticipation. Within, the air was heavy, suffused with the chill of ages. Torches lined the walls, their flames sputtering, and water dripped in distant cadence. The passage twisted, sometimes yawning into wideness, sometimes narrowing until a man must crouch to pass. Bran felt the stones hum as he moved, an undercurrent of magic that responded to his presence. Once, he paused before a relief of a weirwood tree carved into the rock, its leaves long since worn away, but its hollow eyes still watching. He placed a finger on the carved face and felt the heartbeat of the living wood resonate through his veins. They emerged on a ledge overlooking a sprawling cavern where the darkness was so complete that even the torchlight seemed to thin to ribbon-thin motes. In the center stood a shattered tower, its top gouged away by time and ice. The shattered stones strewn like broken teeth. This was the Night Fort, ruin of the Watch, whispered to be haunted by shades of disgraced brothers and darker things. Corin dismounted and lowered Bran's litter to the ground. "Rest here a moment. Beyond lies the old stair, 100 steps to the top of the wall." Bran stepped down, boots silent on the frost-hardened earth, and inhaled the cavern's chill. He saw hints of movement at the edges of torchlight, shapes gliding just beyond sight. His mind reached out, and for a second, his senses caught the soft lament of lost souls, the echo of oaths broken, the rustle of cloth where no living man stood. He closed his eyes against the swirl of voices, focusing on the singular call ahead. A voice unclaimed by time, calling him upward. The stair was a carved helix of stone, its steps worn and slanted. As they climbed, the world outside receded. Robb paused to look back once, his breath pluming white. "I'll keep watch," he said, pale blue eyes grave. "No one gets through the wall this night." Bran nodded, though his gaze was fixed on the stones under his feet. Each ascent felt less like climbing, and more like passing through layers of memory. The birth of the wall, the fall of the giants, the night when the first brothers swore their vows. At the summit, dawn had broken fully, and the winds whipped with renewed fury. Snow whipped over the parapets, claiming every footprint as though to erase their passage. Bran raised his hand, and the wind stilled. His siblings gasped as the gale paused, and the flakes hung motionless. The wall shivered, and for a heartbeat the morning sun struck the ice facets, fracturing them into prismatic rainbows. Then the wind resumed, and the moment was gone. Corin exhaled in wonder. "Never have I seen that gift used with so little thought," he muttered. The wall lives, and it has recognized you. Bran's heart swelled. No longer merely a boy left behind, but a bridge between stone and sky. Yet the true test lay ahead. Their horses waited on the northern side, lean beasts that looked like shadows until they moved. Beyond was a world of white silence, broken only by distant calls. The haunting howl of a wolf, the bark of a raven, and beneath it all, the steady crunch of snow under leather soles. Robb dismounted to help lift Bran's litter, and the column pressed forward into the uncharted expanse. At midday, they halted at a frozen creek. The men broke ice and drank deeply, the cold water singing in their veins. Arya ran her palm along the surface, then licked the smooth crystal with a grin. "It tastes like nothing," she declared. Rickon laughed, but Bran did not smile. He felt the creek's restless stir, the water underneath still flowing, a secret current that defied the freeze. He traced its path with his mind, marking where it would lead to the ice forest. A place where legends told of caves of blue fire and trees that bled sap like blood. As the sun dipped low, they made camp beneath a stand of pines whose branches sagged under the snow's weight. Corin built a fire that sputtered with steam, and Robb doled out salted meat and hard bread, the simplest fare. Bran ate little, content to warm his fingers at the flames and watch the firelight play on the gathered faces. He thought of Winterfell's hearths, stone walls alive with life and laughter, and felt a pang of homesickness he buried beneath purpose. Night deepened, and the stars wheeled overhead in a silent ballet. The wall rose behind them, a pale sentinel dissolving into the sky. Bran felt the world narrow to that flickering ring of light, beyond which lay endless night and ice. He lifted his hands, and the flames leapt higher, crackling like distant thunder. The men stirred, awe and fear mingling in their eyes as Corin issued a silent command. They must rest. The journey ahead would demand every ounce of strength. But Bran could not sleep. Even as slumber tempted him, he felt the night forests beckon, a draw as ancient as the old gods themselves. He slipped from the fire's warmth and moved into the woods, guided by moonlight and instinct. The pines whispered overhead, and each footstep was cushioned in snow as he navigated without sound. He felt the trees lean in, their branches creaking with tales they had waited centuries to tell. Deep within the woods, he found a clearing where the snow lay undisturbed. In the center was a circle of stones partially buried, each carved with runes that glowed faintly in the moonlight. The air here thrummed with power. Bran knelt and laid his palm upon one rune, feeling its pulse like a heartbeat. The runes woke, their glow intensifying until the stones shimmered with inner light. Soft and red as a wounded heart, Bran closed his eyes and reached out, intertwining his spirit with the stone's ancient will. He saw visions. The Night's Watch's beginnings, silent brothers kneeling before a brooded weirwood. The forging of the wall, armies of men and creatures marching, clashing, clashing. Then crestfallen survivors carving their vows into the cold rock. He saw others too. Children of the forest dancing under auroras. Giants trampling through frozen plains, and beyond them a darkness that recoiled from the rune's light. He gasped and withdrew as the glow faded, leaving him trembling in the snow. He rose, shaken but steeled. The stones had spoken, a warning of growing shadow, a beacon of hope woven into the wall's foundation. He knew his path more clearly. He must awaken the old magics, rally the Watchers and the clans beyond, and stand against what stirred north of the Frostfangs. At dawn he returned to camp, snow clinging to his cloak. Robb was loading the horses, concern etched on his face. "Bran, where have you?" He stopped at the look in Bran's eyes, distant, resolute. "I know," Bran said softly. "The stones have spoken. We must wake the old wards." Robb nodded once, sharply, understanding without question. They rode on, deeper into the frozen waste, guided by Bran's visions and Corin's seasoned eye. Days passed in a blur of white horizons and star-pinned nights. They encountered frozen wrecks of former expeditions, skeletons half buried beneath drifted snow, and signs of wildling camps abandoned hastily. Footprints leading into the dark, offerings of bones lined in crude patterns. Then, one morning, Corin halted them at the sight of towering spires of black ice, teeth-like columns erupting from the plain. "The Frost Fangs," he whispered, "home to wargs and giants, and to the children's old places of power." Bran felt the pulses of magic grow stronger, thrumming through the earth like a living thing. He dismounted and pressed his palm against a shard of obsidian ice. It cut like glass, yet he felt no pain, only the surge of ancient memory. The mountains echoed with distant roars, half animal, half spirits unleashed. As they passed into the valley's mouth, a pack of direwolves emerged, fur rippling with frost, eyes like living coals. At their head stood a great she-wolf, scarred across her flank, a creature of legend, thought long extinct. The wolves circled Bran's litter, their hackles raised, yet there was no hostility in their stance. The she-wolf lifted her muzzle and howled, a sound that split the dawn like broken glass. Bran closed his eyes and answered in thought, a single word carried on the wind: ally. The she-wolf bowed her head, and the pack melted away into the shadows. Robb stared, mouth ajar. "By the old gods," he breathed. "They know you, Bran." Bran smiled faintly, breath forming mist. "They know," he echoed. "And they await our call." Thus began the true gathering. Watchers, wolves, and silent otherworldly bonds forged beneath the Frost Fangs. And as Winterfell lay far behind, Bran Stark, broken of leg but unbound in spirit, stood at the heart of a destiny that would either save the North or bury it beneath living ice. Ya, ka, end. Ah. Dawn came pale and fragile, the Frostfang peaks glowing like bleached bone against a sky still tangled with stars. Bran Stark stirred on his litter, the memory of the she-wolf's howl echoing in his mind like a summons. Around him, the Watchers and his siblings prepared silently, boots laced, cloaks adjusted, spears sharpened. Maester Luwin knelt beside him, warming a ragged cloth by the embers of the dying fire, and pressing it to Bran's forehead, murmuring gentle cautions. But Bran's thoughts were already northward, riding the wind toward the hidden places of power that lay ahead. They set out at a brisk pace, the mounted riders leading the way while Bran's litter followed on makeshift runners carved from old timbers bound with iron strapping. Robb rode by Bran's side, spear in hand, his face drawn and determined. Arya and Rickon walked ahead, tracing tracks in the fresh snow, while Corin Halfhand scouted lines of sight with the seasoned patience of a man who had spent half his life tracking foes over barren wastes. By midday they came upon a natural bridge of ice, spanning a chasm so deep its bottom was swallowed by shadow. The wind roared through the crevasse like a living thing, and the bridge trembled beneath the horses' hooves. Bran closed his eyes, feeling the tremor not only in the wood and iron beneath him, but in the very bones of the earth. There was something old here, something that predated human memory, and even the children of the forest. He raised a hand, and the ice-combed gale stilled as though obedient. Corin's eyes flickered with surprise. Robb clenched his jaw in awe. They crossed without further incident, and later that afternoon emerged from the valley into a plateau, crowned by a ring of standing stones, each carved with twisted runes that spoke of bargains between mortal and fey. Here, the air thrummed like a live thing. Bran ordered the company to halt. He slid from the litter, leaning on Robb's strong shoulder for support, and approached the largest stone. A monolith tall as two men, its surface scored with veins of quartz that glinted like watching eyes. Kneeling, Bran placed both hands upon the stone, feeling its secret warmth beneath the frost. Through his closed lids he saw the forest as it had once been. Open glades where children danced beneath auroras, pools where pale-skinned spirits gathered like swirling mists, and pathways that led deeper into the heart of the world. He saw the forging of the wall, wrought not by steel alone, but by ancient magics that bound ice and rock to the oaths of men. And then he heard a voice, not spoken but woven into thought. "The wards grow thin. The darkness gathers beyond." Bran gasped, breaking contact. When he opened his eyes, the others stood behind him. Robb's stern face, Arya's fierce curiosity, Rickon's wide-eyed wonder, Corin's wary respect. "The wards must be renewed," Bran said. His voice was steady, carrying across the silent plain. "We must call to the old powers, or the wall will fail." Robb nodded. "What must we do?" he asked. Bran pointed north, toward a heavy copse of sentinel firs perched at the plateau's edge. "Among those trees lies the hidden grove of the children of the forest. There is a pool, black as night and still as death, where their magic is strongest. There, we will bind the runes anew. Then shall..." They rode on, the frozen landscape yielding only grudgingly to their passage. As the sun sank low, they reached the grove. A circle of ancient firs whose roots wove together beneath the snow, forming a lattice of living wood. In the center lay the pool, its surface a flawless mirror of the darkening sky. No snow had fallen upon it. Not a breath of wind stirred its glassy stillness. The air here was alive with rustling echoes, as if the trees themselves breathed. Bran dismounted and walked to the pool's edge, his boots crunching in the thin layer of silvered frost. He knelt beside the water, staring into its obsidian depths. Beneath the inky surface, ribbons of light pulsed, faint tendrils of power clinging to ancient stones buried deep beneath the water. He touched the edge with the tip of his finger, and the stones responded. The runes on the standing stones lit from within, flaring like the last embers of a dying fire. Behind him, Robb and Corin formed a circle, drawing swords and bowstrings taut to ward off any threat. Arya and Rickon stood close, their eyes reflecting the stone's pale glow. All were still as statues, awaiting Bran's command. Bran closed his eyes and breathed deeply of the cold air, focusing on the heartbeat of the pool, the tremor of the stones, the song of the ancient oaths. He spoke the words of the first men, phrases learned in whispers long ago from the fading songs of old, and the children's own dialect, a language of harmony and sorrow, woven into the world's earliest days. As his voice rose, the water in the pool rippled outward, and the roots beneath the firs thrummed with new life. The sky darkened, clouds gathered in rolling masses. A wind, gentle at first, stirred the tree branches overhead, then howled into a gale. Snow swirled in circles around the clearing as the runes flared brighter, their light spreading over the plateau like a rising tide. Bran fell silent, spent, as the magic settled. When he opened his eyes again, the wind had died, the heavy clouds parted, and the stars shone overhead in cold clarity. The runes on the standing stones glowed faintly, as though replenished by his invocation. Robb exhaled, relief and wonder mingling in his gaze. "It is done," he whispered. Bran stood, trembling. "For now," he said. But the darkness stirs closer yet. They made camp by the pool that night, the air around them humming with residual magic. Luwin tended a small fire while Bran lay on a bed of furs, his mind racing with visions of what lay ahead. Shadows under the Frostfangs, distant drums of war among the wildling tribes, and a deeper chill beyond even the wall's reach. He knew they must press on deeper into the land of ice and ghosts, before the storm truly broke. And so, guided by a boy who could not walk yet, whose spirit roamed freely, the company rose at first light and continued northward, into the realm of living ice, toward destinies written in frozen runes and whispered by ancient trees. Each step, each breath of wind, carried them closer to a reckoning that would test the bonds of blood and magic, and decide whether the wall, and all it protected, would hold against the coming dark. Now. The wind lay heavy upon the frozen air as Bran Stark's small company pressed northward, leaving the still pulsing grove of the children of the forest behind them. Each man and woman rode or walked in solemn silence, their breaths mingling with the faint glow of the replenished wards that now suffused the land itself. Above them, the Frostfang Mountains rose like jagged teeth into a bruised sky, their peaks lost in swirling storm clouds. Somewhere beyond those summits lay the heart of the threat Bran had glimpsed, a gathering darkness older than any living thing. They had chosen a route that skirted the foot of the mountains, following a river whose surface was sealed in ice. Its slow, hidden flow marked their path, winding beneath snowdrifts and through narrow ravines carved by meltwater long ago. Maester Luwin walked beside Bran's litter, reading the stars' pale light against ancient charts, ensuring their course remained true when snow and wind conspired to erase all landmarks. Robb Stark rode just ahead, spear at the ready, his gray eyes scanning every shadow for signs of movement. Arya and Rickon trailed alongside him, each clutching a dagger, one to carve paths through icy underbrush, the other to skewer frozen fish that sometimes broke free in half-thawed eddies. By mid-morning of their third day beyond the grove, they came upon the remains of a wildling camp. The tents, now collapsed under heavy snow, stood sentinel like bleached bones. Within, half buried in drifts, lay the blackened stumps of cooking fires and scattered tokens, chunks of animal bone painted with crude runes. Rickon ran forward, brushing snow aside to reveal a crude carving of a broken sword. "They fought here," he called, voice muffled in his hood. "They lost." Robb dismounted, moving through the tents with measured steps. "Either lost or fled," he said. "Keep alert." Qhorin Halfhand signaled the watchers to fan out, forming a protective cordon. Arya crouched beside a trampled snowbank and found tracks, barefoot prints great as manhole lids. "Giants," she whispered, tracing the outline with her gloved finger. Bran closed his eyes and reached out with that subtle power he had honed. An echo of life, a thread woven between body and earth. He tasted the fear lingering on the bones of the camp, felt the sorrow in the winds that had carried the wildlings' final screams. Then, from far beyond the walls of ice, he heard a rumble, an undertone of thunder, as if the mountain itself were groaning in pain. "They went that way," Bran said, pointing toward a defile between two frost-crusted ridges. "But not on foot." Robb frowned. "They rode." "Not on beasts," Bran answered, his voice soft but unwavering. "On the wings of storm." At that moment, a flash of pale light flickered on the horizon, bright as a star falling to earth. Then another, and another, until the dusk sky was littered with bursts of luminescence. The watchers raised spears. Robb drew his sword, its steel humming in challenge. Maester Luwin laid a calming hand on Bran's shoulder. "Child, speak only when you must," he whispered. Bran inhaled, steadying himself against the shudder of the litter. He felt the surge of something vast and terrible on the wind. The approach of the ice wraiths, creatures of nightmare made of storm and sorrow, born when the frost fangs first rose. They were half glimpse, half breath of cold, with eyes that burned blue as glacier hearts. To face them in the open was death, for their touch leached warmth and will alike. "Hold," Bran ordered. "We cannot fight them. Not here." He looked to Robb. "Lead us into the ravine. The walls will shield us." Robb barked an order, and the columns shifted. Horses slithered between ridges. Men pressed close to pacified horses. Bran closed his eyes again, calling upon the ward he had awakened in the grove. He felt the magic coil within him, a coil of arctic energy bound to his still body, yearning to be set free. As they entered the narrows, the first wraiths drifted into view, pale shapes flickering in and out of solidity, wailing like lost souls. Qhorin raised an alarm. The watchers braced their spears. Robb swung his blade in arcs of steel that passed harmlessly through the forms. Arya hurled a dagger, which vanished upon impact. Rickon whimpered as a wraith passed through him, its touch like shards of glass. But Bran did not flinch. He reached out with his freed spirit and unleashed the magic of the stones. A shockwave of ice-laden wind burst from his chest, slamming into the wraiths. They recoiled, their forms scattering like smoke in a gale. The ravine shook as if struck by an avalanche, and snow cascaded from the slopes above. The watchers tumbled to their knees. Horses plunged and whinnied in panic. But the wraiths, driven back by the burst of power, fled upstream, their haunting cries swallowed by the narrowing pass. When the wind died, the ravine lay silent. Snow dusted the broken spears and the trembling horses. Bran sank to his knees in the snow, white bloom at his lips. Maester Luwin and Robb lifted him into the litter. "You've done enough," Robb said, voice tense with relief and awe. Bran shook his head. We must press on. They will regroup. The heart of their power lies deeper, beyond the frozen cradle, where the oldest magic slumbers. They carried on, the ravine's walls giving way eventually to a plateau of glass tundra, so smooth and polished that it reflected the sky like black mirror. Here and there, fissures spidered through the ice, revealing glinting crystals of permafrost that bent the light into tiny rainbows. Qhorin paused, scanning the ground. The air tastes stale here, he said, like a dream drowned in silence. Arya nodded, crouching to press a hand to the ice. Gone children, she murmured. They played here once, before the wall. Bran climbed to stand atop the litter, overriding Maester Luwin's mild protests. He lifted his arms and spun slowly, drawing runes in the air with his fingertips. The wind answered, eddies of freezing breath swirling around them. The watchers formed a circle. Robb stood close to his brother, eyes glowing with pride and worry. Bran breathed the air of the plateau deep into his lungs, feeling the vestiges of ancient rites resonate in his bones. He found the center fissure, a yawning crack leading downward, its depths lost in endless black. This is the frozen cradle, he announced. The birthplace of the frost magic that binds the wraiths. We must seal the fissure with our own will, or they will never be denied. Qhorin drew his bow. If you insist on walking into that maw boy, we'll cover you. Bran nodded. But we go together. He slid from the litter and began tracing a circle of runes around the fissure, using fingers to etch symbols in the frost. The ice under his touch glowed faintly blue. Robb and the Watchers moved in a ring, standing shoulder to shoulder, protecting Bran as he labored. Arya and Rickon helped him cast small piles of spring water, collected in magical wards from the grove, around the runes. The water froze instantly, binding the symbols into the ice. When the last rune was complete, Bran stepped back. He closed his eyes and channeled the power of the standing stones, the children's grove, and the warded pool into the circle. The ice trembled, and with a thunderous crack, the fissure snapped shut, the plate of ice above settling like a lid on a coffin. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Then the wind returned, warm and still, blowing away the charged frost. Robb exhaled in wonder. By the old gods, he muttered. You've done it. Bran sank to the ground, exhaustion claiming him in waves. Maester Luwin hurried to support him. Rest now, the Maester urged. Your body, my body, Bran said softly, is but a vessel. The path lies before us. They spent the night on the cradle, under a sky so clear the stars seemed close enough to touch. Bran dreamed of moving freely, of walking among the children, of standing at the wall's summit and gazing back at Winterfell, where his family waited. He dreamed of the she-wolf's howls, calling him deeper into ice forests, where giants slept beneath stone crowns. At dawn, when the Watchers awoke to the still glow of residual magic, they found Bran stirring. He rose unassisted, a miracle that drew gasps of astonishment. Qhorin bowed his head and Robb clasped his brother's shoulder. You walk, Robb said, voice thick. Walk with me. Bran placed his feet on the ground, feeling the snow's crisp bite beneath them. He took a step, then another. A careful, measured walk that felt like rebirth. Behind him, cheers rang out, but he heard only the steady beat of his own heart. Together, they marched onward, leaving the frozen cradle sealed and the wraiths banished to helpless fury. Ahead lay the eastern passes of the Frostfangs, where legends told of a cavern of living ice, and of a heart of purest magic that could either save the wall or break it forever. And Bran Stark, who had once been bound to a bed, now strode fully into his destiny, every step a promise that Winterfell and all the realms of men would not fall to darkness while he drew breath. And now, one day, the eastern slopes of the Frostfangs rose ahead in jagged tiers of ice and stone, their tips lost in low-hanging clouds that scudded past on bitter winds. Bran Stark, his legs now carrying him uncertainly but with growing confidence. led the small company forward, each breath a crystalline plume in the frozen air. Behind him, Robb and Qhorin moved in loose formation, watchers flanking the path, while Arya and Rickon scouted ahead, eyes bright with the thrill of the unknown. As daylight waned, the trail narrowed into a steeply pitched ravine, whose walls glittered with veins of blue-white ice. Here the wind cut like a razor's edge, and every step required care lest a loose stone send a band of travelers plunging into the abyss. The sun, low and pocked by cloud, threw fractured light across the rime, creating dancing prisms that dazzled the eyes. Bran paused on a jutting ledge, placing a hand on the frozen wall, and feeling the faint hum of magic still present after the sealing of the cradle. In that vibration, he sensed that they were drawing close to the heart of power, where the earth's pulse throbbed beneath the ice. Qhorin spoke in a low rumble. "The Frostfire Cavern lies just above," he said, nodding to a narrow cleft, half hidden behind a collapsed pillar of ice. "Few have entered and lived to tell the tale. Inside, there is heat and light that burn with ancient will." Robb frowned, glancing at Bran's determined face. "Then it must be there we go. The legends say the cavern's heart can vanquish or unmake the wall's wards. We must claim that power first." Bran's nod was grave. "And guard it, so the darkness cannot leverage it." They set to work clearing the entrance. Arya pried away ice with her dagger. Rickon heaved fallen columns of frost aside. Maester Luwine chanted quietly over each break, warding their work from any curious spirits that might lurk. When at last, the yawning mouth of the cavern lay open before them, a wave of warm air gusted outward, carrying embers of light and the faint hiss of steam. Bran's breath caught. This place was alive. Torches lit. They entered. The walls glowed with living ice, the surfaces rippling as though water still flowed within. Beneath their feet, crystallized steam crunched like bones. The farther they penetrated, the more the air thickened with warmth, until the cold of the outer world became a distant memory. Strange blossoms of frost bloomed along crevices, each petal humming with silent energy, and in the stony floor lay pools of molten ice, bright blue pools that glowed from within, as if caught in a perpetual dawn. Qhorin led them to the cavern's heart, a vast domed chamber at least 50 paces across, its ceiling dripping with icicles like stalactites of glass. At its center stood a monolithic pillar of obsidian ice, translucent veins coursing with fire-like light. This was the Frostfire Spire, said to have formed when a star fell into the high mountains in the world's earliest days. The air shimmered around it, and as Bran drew near, he felt the spires will sweep through him, a voice both terrible and mournful, calling for remembrance and sacrifice. Robb set his torch upon a dais carved into the floor, and turned to Bran. "What now?" Bran placed a hand upon the spire. The light within flared, and he closed his eyes, opening his mind to its song. He saw visions of the wall's creation, giants hewing glaciers with titanic axes, children of the forest channeling living flame into the stones, and the first watchers kneeling to bind flesh, blood, and oath into something that would hold back the long night. He felt the weight of every vow ever sworn beneath its cold summit. He drew breath and began the incantation taught by the old trees, weaving first men words and the children's tongue together. As he spoke, fire bloomed in the veins of the ice, and the spire pulsed in time with his voice. The watchers kneeling around him raised their weapons and bowed their heads, honoring the right. Robb stood over him, sword raised in silent guardianship, while Arya and Rickon touched the edges of the pillar. Tiny runes spiraled at the base, carved so deep they glowed like embers. When the final words left Bran's lips, the spire gave one great surge of light that rolled outward like a wave, filling the chamber with a soft rainbow glow. The air snapped like thunder, then stilled in reverent silence. The pools of molten ice stilled, the frost blossoms brightened, and the walls of the cavern shone as though polished by some unseen hand. Bran staggered, breathless, and Qhorin caught him. "By the old gods and the magic of the first dawn, you have rekindled the flame." Robb exhaled. "The power is ours to wield, or to guard. The Night's Watch should know of this place. Bran shook his head. No. If even one cruel hand should find the Frostfire Spire, the balance will shatter. We must conceal this chamber again. Then Arya and Rickon set to work with Qhorin, carefully recollapsing the ice pillars and masking the entrance with fallen rock and snow. Maester Luwin sealed the wards, chanting blessings that hid the sight from prying eyes. When the final stone was in place, the chamber fell silent, as though it had never been opened. Bran emerged into the dusk of the ravine, where the last light of day dappled the snow. He stood for a moment, breathing deeply of the clean air, feeling the weight of ice and flame now both his burden and his blessing. Robb rode to his side, concern giving way to pride. "You have saved all the realms of men," Robb said in a hush. Bran allowed himself the faintest smile. "Saved. For now. The darkness gathers still. We must return to the wall, warn Castle Black, and prepare." They retraced their steps beneath the frost fangs, the lessons of the cavern etched into their hearts. The journey back was fraught. The ice wraiths returned in greater numbers, but the newly kindled magic of the wall's heart held them at bay. The closing of the frozen cradle and the rekindling of the Frostfire Spire had shifted the balance. The storms raged, but failed to break through. When at last they stood once more below the wall's looming face, the wind greeted them like a long-awaited comrade. Bran raised his arms, chanting the words of warding that had become second nature. A litany of power woven from ancient vows and frozen oaths. Behind him, the Watchers set their own runes, masons and maesters, lending their craft to the new enchantments. As they emerged onto the wall's summit, the sun broke through the clouds in a burst of pale gold. Winterfell lay far to the south, a distant promise of hearth and home. At Bran's side stood Robb, Arya, Rickon, Qhorin, and Maester Luwin, brothers in arms bound by oath and blood. Together, they gazed northward, where the wind bore no snow but carried only emptiness and the promise of evil. Bran lowered his hands, his heart steady. His body had once been broken, but his spirit had grown into something greater than feared limbs. He had become the living bridge between the mortal realm and the old magics, and now the wall would stand, enduring so long as his will endured. The sentinels of the Night's Watch awaited below, their black cloaks rippling in the wind. Jon Snow, Lord Commander now returned from his own trials, raised his head at the sight of Bran. Bran smiled at him, and in that simple gesture passed the silent assurance. Winterfell's broken boy had walked the paths beyond, faced the ancient powers, and returned. The wall would hold. And so, at the edge of the world, amid the endless wind and ice, the tale of Bran Stark took its next turn, a chapter of hope and vigilance in the unending war between light and shadow. For though the darkness would come again, it would find the wall guarded not only by steel and oath, but by the heart of a boy who had learned to stand where no man could stand before. Oh. The first thaw of spring arrived not with warmth, but with a sudden shift in the wind, as though the north itself exhaled after a long frosted breath. Bran Stark felt it on his skin before he saw it. A faint hint of damp in the air, the hard lines of ice softening underfoot. He stood atop the wall's summit, looking south toward Winterfell's distant shape, and north toward the rolling white plain beyond. And in that charged moment he sensed the turning of the world. Below him, the men of the Night's Watch readied their horses and provisions, while Robb Stark and the Stark children gathered at his side. Rickon, now tall enough that he no longer seemed a boy, brushed snow from his boots as he watched a raven wheel over the gatehouse. Arya leaned forward, dark eyes bright with restless energy, her hair plastered by melting flakes. Robb's broad shoulders were squared against the wind. Maester Luwin adjusted his satchel of parchments and potions with a solemn air. Even Qhorin Halfhand, grizzled and ever watchful, allowed a brief upturn of his lips as he took in the thaw. "We should return," Bran said, voice almost lost in the breeze. "The wall's wards have held, but winter's last storm may yet test them. And Winterfell, Mother needs to know we live and safe." Robb nodded. "We ride at first light." He laid a hand on Bran's shoulder, strong and sure. "You taught me that strength comes not only from steel." Bran inclined his head, and turned to watch the watchers pull banners from beneath lean-to shelters. Their black cloaks caught on the battlements and snapped out like mourning flags, but in that snap was promise. They would stand their watch. When at last the company descended, the roar of wings greeted them. Ravens, dozens of them, gliding over the wall, messengers swift as winter shadows. Bran released one from his gloved hand, bidding it bear word to Winterfell. "We return," he thought, sending intent with the bird's flight. Its wings beat the chill as it rose, a single white feather drifting behind it like a promise. The journey south was uneventful for the first day. The road wound through icy woodlands, where saplings shivered with budding life, and the pulse of thawing streams murmured beneath half-frozen crusts. Bran walked beside Robb, his steps steady though the ground beneath him slithered in places. They spoke little, preferring the wordless communion of brothers who had seen death and magic beyond the reach of common men. At night, they camped on the banks of a swollen river, its torrent fed by warming snowmelt. Robb crouched by the water's edge, sharpening his sword, while Corin kept watch in the dark trees. Arya boiled stew in a battered pot, her small form bent close to the fire's warmth, and Rickon chased sparks with a twig, laughter soft as a thawing icicle. Bran sat on a fallen log, tracing runes in the wet ground with the tip of his boot, ensuring the land itself remembered the oath he had renewed. Maester Luwin poured broth into a wooden bowl and handed it to Bran, his gaze tender with relief. "You did well," he said. "Fewer stay to do what you have done." Bran ate in silence, savoring the simple warmth of broth and firelight. He thought of the Frostfire cavern and the frozen cradle, of the ice wraiths driven back by his will, and of the silent she-wolf whose howl had first guided him north. That guide remained with him still, a presence in the wind and an echo in his dreams. He closed his eyes, feeling the pulse of river and forest beneath the thawing earth, and whispered a soft prayer to the old gods for their continued favor. On the third morning they reached the lands known as the Stony Shore, where the brittle ice of winter met the restless sea. Here, the winds bore the salt of the ocean, and gulls wheeled overhead in ragged circles. The road curved toward the neck, and vestiges of the bygone Crannogman settlements appeared. Moss-covered stumps of wooden palisades, half-sunken foundations that squatted like ancient beasts. It was here that the Night's Watch had once hidden boats for sudden retreats, and here that Rickon found his first sea glass, amber and smooth, polished by waves. They paused at a narrow causeway over a tidal marsh, where reeds bowed under the weight of thaw, and the water rippled with half-hidden currents. As the riders dismounted to lead their mounts across, a cry rang out from atop a distant hill. A horn, ragged and urgent. Robb's hand went to his sword, and Corin scanned the horizon with narrowed eyes. Bran moved to the crest beside them and saw a column of horses racing toward them, dusted in mud and riderless. The riders' cloaks fluttered like ragged banners, and as the column closed, they saw the pale arms and legs of the riders floppy in the stirrups. Panic sprinted through the camp. Arya drew her dagger and Rickon huddled behind Bran, eyes wide. Robb motioned his archers forward. Corin skirted to the flank, sword drawn. Bran's heart thundered. Messenger ravens did not bring terror. Yet the riders were no threat. They slid past. And at the last horse was strapped a bundle of tattered cloth and a single black iron bolt. Robb approached it and unwound the cloth, revealing a gleaming arrowhead carved in the shape of a weirwood leaf. Beneath it was a scrap of parchment, edges singed. An image of Winterfell, etched in blood-red ink, flames around its towers. Beneath the sketch, "Burn for winter's end, or the wall will fail once more." A hush fell. Maester Luwin swallowed. Arya's hand trembled on her dagger hilt. Rickon whimpered. Bran's lips curved in a terrible smile. "They know we returned," he said softly. "They seek to draw us back south, to strike at Winterfell's heart." Robb's jaw clenched. "They know the Crannogman paths. They could arrive south before we can." "Then we cannot go directly," Bran said. "We must reach Winterfell by a hidden way, through the Wolf's Wood, across the marshes, past the deep forests. I know a path." He let his sight wander to the horizon, tasting the land's old roads, feeling the pulse of earth and stone where no road was drawn. We cut through the neck to Deepwood Motte. Lord Glover will heed Winterfell's call. From there we can send men to defend home." He paused. "And the ones who sent this, they fall under my watch." Robb bowed his head, fierce pride in his eyes. "Lead on, brother." They gathered their mounts and turned east, away from the main road, plunging deeper into the reawakening wilderness. The path was narrow and scarcely more than a trail. Ancient wheel ruts filled with moss half concealed what once had been stones laid for carts, long since rotted away. The horses slipped on muddy embankments, and at times the trees closed in so densely that sunlight struggled past thickets of green. Rickon rode behind Bran, craning to catch every rustle of leaves. Arya moved at her side, alert as a fox. By nightfall, they emerged into a meadow of stunted oaks, their branches laced with budding leaves. A stream wound through the grass, its ribbons of water shining in the last light. "Here." Bran dismounted and knelt at the water's edge, dipping his hand into the clear current. He tasted the land. No warded magic, no unnatural chill, only the promise of life's returning tide. He left a small rune carved into the bole of a young oak, the mark of Winterfell's kin, and rose. Far off in the gloom, the soft blast of a horn answered across the trees. "Glover," Robb murmured, guiding his mount toward the sound. Soon they reached the palisade of Deepwood Motte, its walls woven from sharpened logs, and guarded by 200 bowmen who raised their longbows in salute. Lord Donald Glover, tall and gaunt, met them at the gate, his graying hair brushed back from a lined, weathered face. He had been informed of their purpose by the Crannogman messengers. Swift-moving and unseen, and though his eyes held concern, he bowed deeply to Bran. "It is good you came by path," Glover said. "The main roads are crawling with shadows. We will send riders to Winterfell tonight, and muster half our strength to defend the castle's outer walls." Robb clasped Glover's forearm. "Your loyalty honors us. Catelyn will see this as well." "Now." Bran stepped forward, his gaze sweeping the battlements. "And we must guard the neck itself. Any hostile force that reaches this far north can outflank Winterfell before its gates are sealed." Glover nodded. "My men will hold here." He raised his voice. "Men of Deepwood Motte, arm yourselves in the name of House Stark. Slay all who would burn your home." From the walls, a roar answered. A chorus of steel ringmail and leather jerkin, of axes and spear points. Their company dismounted within the moat, handing horses to awaiting grooms. Bran felt the land sigh under his feet. The Crannogman's silent roads, the neck's frozen causeways, the marsh's hidden paths, all breathing life into their cause. He thought of the threat that hunted in the south, and of the wall behind them, vigilant. That night they set camp within Deepwood's courtyard. Torches glowed in iron sconces, and fires crackled on braziers. Robb, Arya, Rickon, Bran, and Glover sat at a long wooden table, maps unfurled, arrows and quills scattered. Maester Luwin sorted dispatches for ravens, and Corran oversaw the guard rotations. The air was thick with urgency, and the comfort of allies made real. Bran traced his finger along the map from Deepwood Motte to Winterfell, marking the hidden routes and gatehouses. 100 riders could reach Winterfell's walls before dawn, he said. "They'll strike under cover of darkness, hoping to catch us unprepared." Robb frowned. "We will have fewer men, but they will be Stark's men. Father's bannermen are loyal even in the dark." Arya stabbed a finger at an overgrown road. "We set traps here, in the Milkwater Ford where they must cross. And we guard the cattle road. They cannot bring siege weapons along narrow paths." "Then Rickon chimed in, "and we station scouts on the hills south of Wolf's Den. If they slip past, we'll know." Bran smiled at his siblings, fierce with purpose. "Good. And I will ride with the scouts to the ford. My sight will guide them." Robb hesitated, but the resolve in Bran's eyes was iron. "Then it is settled. We ride within the hour." He stood, lifting his goblet in silent toast. Bran rose as well, lifting his bowl of thin ale. "To Winterfell, and to the old ways that guard us still." They drank, and the firelight danced across their faces. Outside, the wind moaned in the rafters. A distant lament or a warning, none could tell. Within, the stark banners hung still, woven direwolves leaping on gray cloth. Bran looked upon them and thought of the wall held by his hand, of nameless magics bound by his voice, and of the darkness that still threatened. He felt his strength return with the land's thaw, felt the bond between brothers and sister, and the silent promise that he would watch over them all. When the hour came, the company rode out under a moonlit sky. Robb led the main force west toward Winterfell. Arya and Rickon guided flankers to the ford. Glover's men took positions in the marshes. Bran rode with the scouts, his eyes attuned to every whisper of wind, every tremor in the soil. Qhorin rode beside him, silent as a shadow, while Maester Luwin followed with a small contingent, carrying fresh orders for the castle. As the moon sank low, they reached the Milkwater Ford, a shallow crossing where the river ran swift and clear. Bran paused on the bank, closing his eyes and reaching out. He felt the water's pulse, the hidden eddies beneath the ice, and far off the echo of hoofbeats on frozen ground. He smiled grimly. "They come," he whispered. Within moments, shapes emerged on the far bank, riders cloaked in gray, their horses splashing through the water in silent ranks. The lead rider held a torch high. The firelight glinted on steel helmets and the edges of drawn swords. Bran gave the signal. He sounded a horn, a low, haunting note that carried across the water. Arya's archers answered in kind, drawing bows taut, and Glover's crossbowmen stepped from cover. Bran reached into himself and called upon the ward of ice and flame, unleashing a pulse that rippled through the water. The river's current seemed to quicken, swirling the enemy horses off balance. At the same instant, arrows rained from both banks, loosed with deadly precision. The ford became chaos. Riders pitched from saddles, water splashing red, swords ringing on mail. Those who survived the volley turned to flee, but mist rose from the river and cloaked the battlefield. Within that gray veil, Bran's scouts, guided by his sight, cut down the foe with hidden steel. When the mist lifted, the ford lay littered with broken weapons and scattered bodies. The survivors fled south, leaving their dead behind. Bran knelt by the river's edge, touching the water's surface, feeling its calm buoy beneath his fingers. "Let this water bear witness," he said softly. "Let it speak of what happens to those who would strike at the wolves of Winterfell." Qhorin nodded grimly. "None shall stand before you, boy." Bran rose, breath steady. Ahead, the lights of Winterfell glimmered, a faint promise on the horizon. The ford was held. The castle was safe for now. And with that, he knew the next chapter would be written in the ancient halls of his home, where mother and bannerman waited in fear and hope both. They remounted and rode on into the night, the echo of hoofbeats soft on the thawing road. Behind them, the Milkwater flowed on, carrying their victory southward to Winterfell's gates, its waters remembering the names of those who bled for the north, and the boy who stood unbowed between ice and flame. Handi. The lanterns of Winterfell glimmered against the dark sky like distant stars fallen to earth, their golden glow promising warmth and shelter after the long, perilous ride from Deepwood Motte. Bran Stark felt their pull as he rode at the head of the Stark forces, the rhythmic crunch of hooves on the half-thawed road echoing like a heartbeat in the growing silence. Behind him, Robb kept tight formation, Arya and Rickon flanking the rearguard with grins of fierce pride upon their faces. Qhorin Halfhand and Maester Luwin brought up the rear, vigilant eyes scanning the tree line for any last desperate ambush. As they crested the final rise, the tumbling towers and high walls of Winterfell came into full view. Smoke spiraled from chimneys in the castle's outer ring, and torches lit along the battlements cast long shadows upon the courtyard below. Gates hung open, awaiting their return, and the banners of House Stark, once tattered by winter's storms, now snapped crisp and new upon the wind. Bran's heart swelled with something he had not felt since his fall from the Weirwood Tower, a pure, steadfast joy at standing once more within his home's embrace. They descended into the courtyard, and Robb signaled pausing arms. The knights and archers of the household guard formed lines on either side of the path, their spears upright in salute. Lord Cragen Stark, returned unexpectedly from a northern mission, stood at the head of these lines. His weathered face broke into a grin as Bran dismounted, and he embraced his nephew fiercely, stooping to meet Bran's height. "By the old gods," Cragen rumbled, "you've walked through ice and flame and returned to us. Winterfell owes you its life." Bran smiled, returning the embrace. "And she owes your oath, uncle. We have guarded her walls as you commanded." Behind them, Robb strode forward to greet Lady Catelyn, who had emerged from the great hall at the sound of their horns. She held herself with quiet dignity, worry still lingering in her eyes. But at the sight of her children, the taut lines of her face softened. Tears shone in her gaze as she gathered Bran into her arms. Then Robb, and finally Arya and Rickon, each in turn, as if to anchor them firmly in her arms after their long separation. Inside the great hall, a feast had been laid. Steaming bowls of venison stew, fresh baked breads, and pitchers of spiced wine. The long oaken table groaned beneath the bounty as bannermen and knights cheered the return of the Stark heirs. Torches along the walls cast dancing light upon the seat of Lord Eddard Stark, carved with direwolf heads and runic symbols. Bran's gaze lingered on that empty chair, and for a moment, sorrow washed over him. A dull ache for his father's counsel, for the laugh lines that once crinkled Ned Stark's eyes. Yet he found solace in knowing that his father's memory guided them still, and that together they would uphold the vow he had sworn at the old god's weirwood. As the merriment settled into the deep hum of voices, Bran rose to his feet. "Thank you all," he began, voice clear in the hush. "Winterfell stands because men and women of this house have kept faith, with each other and with the land. But tonight, as we share this hall, we must remember what lies beyond our walls. The darkness we drove back at the frozen cradle, and the Frostfire Cavern has not vanished. It stirs still in frozen places where our sight cannot reach. We have won this battle, but the war for the North endures. And now," heads turned, and Lord Cragen rose beside him. "My nephew speaks truly. We must strengthen our bonds with the clans of the Neck, with the Crannogmen, the Glovers at Deepwood Motte, and the Umbers beyond Last Hearth. Every spear and bow must be ready, every bannerman sworn anew." He looked to Maester Luwin. "Send ravens to all loyal houses. A council must be called at first light," Bran added softly. "And we must renew the old wards upon Winterfell itself. Inscribe the runes of ice and flame within our walls, beneath our floors, in the chamber of every lord and lady. Let the magic of the wall guide us here too, so that no enemy may slip unseen." A murmur of agreement rose, and Lady Catelyn laid a hand on Bran's shoulder. "Then let it be so. Tonight, we celebrate our children's safe return. Tomorrow, we prepare for the trials to come." Medine. As the feast resumed with renewed vigor, Bran allowed himself to settle into the warmth of the hall. The rich flavors of spiced mutton and honeyed mead filling his senses. Yet his mind drifted to the north, to the silent cavern of Frostfire, and the cradle sealed beneath ice. He pictured the wraiths swirling in hungry clouds beyond the wall, remembered the fierce howl of the she-wolf in the Frostfang shadows. He would ride again, if need be. His legs had learned to bear him once more, but it was his spirit that would carry the true weight of Winterfell's fate. When at last the hour grew late and the last toast rang out, Bran slipped away from the hall into the starlit courtyard. Robb joined him, silence stretching between them like an old, comfortable cloak. Above, the wall's distant silhouette marked the horizon, white and resolute. "You have grown, brother," Robb said quietly, voice low against the night wind. "Stronger than I ever dreamed." Bran looked back at him, eyes reflecting torchlight. "We all do, Robb. When the land calls, it gives us strength we never knew we had. The wall still stands because of what we learned there. Steadfastness, patience, and the understanding that power is more than steel." He paused, glancing toward the gate leading north. "Someday, I will return there. But for now, Winterfell needs me, and I will not fail her." Robb clasped his shoulder. "Then we stand together, as always." And beneath the silent watch of the old god's stars, the brothers turned toward the great hall once more. Steady, united, and prepared to face whatever dark tide the north would summon next. Okay. Ndawa. The dawn air lay crisp upon Winterfell's ramparts, the first light of morning gilding the frost-worn stones as ravens wheeled overhead in hurried flight. Bran Stark stood at the peak of the battlements, cloak drawn tight against the residual chill, and gazed northward across the courtyard where banners fluttered in awakening breeze. Each banner was newly sown, dire wolves leaping upon fields of gray, and they snapped with purpose, as if echoing the resolve beating in every Stark heart. Below him, the courtyard hummed with renewed energy. Black-clad riders from Castle Black had arrived in the night, their banners marked with the White Wolf's head. They mixed among Winterfell's men-at-arms, exchanging tales of wind-lashed towers and long watches. The castle smiths worked diligently along the inner wall, reforging spears and sharpening blades in preparation for the storm they all knew was coming. Bran turned at the sound of boots on stone and found his brother Robb approaching, Lord Cregan Stark and Maester Luwin close behind. Arya and Rickon trailed, swords sheathed but drawn, eyes bright with determination. Behind them came Qhorin half-hand, his single hand resting lightly upon the pommel of his sword, ever watchful. "We meet soon," Robb stated quietly, nodding toward the inner keep where the War Council would convene. "Lord Cregan has the hall prepared, and the bannermen gather within. How do you wish to begin?" Bran's gaze drifted back to the north gate, to the open fields where their skirmish at the Milkwater Ford had repelled the first blow. "We remind them of our strength, our unity. Let Lord Manderley and the Umbers feel the bond we share before we commit to any offensive." He paused, fingertips tracing unseen runes in the frost. "We must also decide how to guard the south road and the western ridge. No flank must lie unguarded." Maester Luwin stepped forward, parchment and quill in hand. "And the ravens bring word from Deepwood Motte and Greywater watch. Lord Glover pledges 200 men-at-arms. The Crannogmen under Lady Dustin send scouts and skirmishers adept in the marshes. Lord Karstark offers all his bowmen." He unrolled the letters for all to see. Bran nodded. "Very good. We reserve 20 men for each flank, 300 here, 100 at the eastern pass leading to White Harbor, and the remainder in reserve at the Winterfold Road. If the enemy tries to break through, they'll find ice and steel awaiting them." Qhorin's gravelly voice cut through the council's quiet. "And the north? The Wall's Watchers? They'll need relief, and men to hold the tunnels if the Wraiths attempt another crossing." "Benderol." Bran met Qhorin's gaze. "Send 50 men north at once. Maester Luwin, dispatch ravens to Castle Black and Mole's Town. Advise them of our success at the ford, and vow support. Ask them to send their most trusted commanders with 15 men each. We'll hold the tunnels and reinforce the catacombs beneath the wall." Rickon spoke up, voice steady despite his youth. "And I can ride with them, keep their messages swift." Robb laid a proud hand on Rickon's shoulder. "A sound choice. Your speed is unmatched." With the deployment agreed, Lady Catelyn arrived, her presence quieting the council. She wore a gown of dark wool, her gray hair brushed back, eyes still shadowed by the perils they'd faced. "My children," she said, voice gentle yet firm, "Winterfell's hearth is warm. But my heart is wary. The north wind carries more than frost. It carries dread. We must not only shield our walls, but nurture the people within them. Let the small folk know we Nods circled the table. Arya, youthful fierceness shining in her eyes, rose. "I volunteer to walk the wards, greet the soldiers, and speak with the people. They need more than lordly assurances, they need faces they know." Bran smiled. "And you'll have mine. This afternoon you two will ride through the outer wards together. Show them our unity." With that, the council dissolved into purposeful activity. Maester Luwin penned raven dispatches. Qhorin and the captains mapped patrol routes, and the Stark children spoke quietly among themselves, planning their rides through the castle and beyond. Bran lingered, gazing once more northward where the wall's towering face rose against the sky. In his breast, he felt the steady beat of ancient power. The old runes he had sewn into ice and flame, the wards of Winterfell, and the enduring bond with the first men and the children of the forest. Behind him, Winterfell rose as both bastion and hearth, heart bound by stone and spirit alike. At midday's toll, the great gates opened, and Arya and Rickon rode out, armored not for war, but for hope. They carried gifts of bread and ale for the soldiers, tokens carved in direwolf shape for the small folk, and letters of encouragement sealed with wax bearing Bran's personal crest. As they passed under the archway, the sun caught on their blades and cast long shadows before them. Shadows of a house determined to stand unbroken. Bran and Robb watched them go, wind tousling their hair. "The North endures," Robb murmured. "So long as we hold fast." Bran closed his eyes, feeling the pulse of earth, runes, and the unseen magic woven into every stone. "We will hold," he replied, opening his eyes to the horizon, "and we will endure." Thus, in the heart of Winterfell, as banners billowed and ravens took flight, the Stark family prepared for the trials to come, strengthened not only by steel and oath, but by the ancient magics and the unbreakable bonds of kinship that bound them to the land and to one another. Even as Arya and Rickon rode through Winterfell's outer wards, carrying bread and ale to bolster the soldiers' spirits, a deeper stir was stirring beyond the walls. The far northern gate, where the Crannogman scouts from Greywater Watch kept watch, reported signs of movement. Faint footprints in the snow drifting across turf that should have been undisturbed, the echo of hooves borne on cold wind. When Arya passed the gatehouse, she noticed the Crannogman's silent alarm, drawn daggers, alert eyes, but they offered her only a curt nod. Human words were scarce in the marshes. Whatever they had sensed was real, and it would test Winterfell's new defenses. Back within the inner bailey, Bran convened with Qhorin Halfhand and Maester Luwin in the Hall of Faces, that vaulted chamber whose walls bore every mask of the dead. Here the old gods watched in silent stone. Bran traced the outline of the direwolf carved above the high seat, then spoke softly of the Crannogman's warning. Qhorin fingered the pommel of his sword. "If wraiths can cross the frozen cradle, they may find paths through the thawed neck as well." Luwin unfurled a map of the marshes. "These causeways are narrow. One storm-worn road leads east, another to the western bog. We've posted our knights and bowmen. If hostile riders come, they must funnel here." "No." Bran bowed his head, recalling the taste of swamp wind and the silent currents beneath the waters. "Then we lead them into our trap. Let the eastern causeway be a gauntlet of pits and stakes, the western lined with archers beneath camouflaged hides. They will think to slip past Winterfell's walls, but they will find only our steel and their own terror." Qhorin allowed a faint grin. "A hunter's plan." By dusk, the defenses were set. In the eastern marsh, wagons laden with sharpened stakes were sunk level to the ground beneath rotting reeds. Pits were camouflaged by winter moss. In the west, bowmen from House Karstark and House Glover crouched among brush, their arrows tipped with frozen poison drawn from swamp herbs. Maester Luwin oversaw the placement of hidden lanterns that could be lit at the moment of ambush, and scattered charcoal traps that would ignite smoke and panic among foul riders. Meanwhile, Robb and Cregan Stark led a detachment beyond the gate to inspect the northern road that wound through frost-cloaked forest. Arya and Rickon joined them after delivering their gifts, their spirits buoyed by grateful smiles from Winterfell's folk. As the group rode beneath towering pines, the air grew still. No bird sang, no wind stirred. Suddenly the horses snorted in alarm. Shadows flickered between the trunks. Steel rang as Robb drew his sword, Qhorin and the riders dismounting in a practiced sweep. The enemy emerged. A band of wildling horsemen, faces painted in charcoal and ash, cloaked in fur so white they nearly vanished against the snow. But their mounts were spindly, gaunt beasts, sickly and driven. At their head rode a figure taller than any man, crowned with antlers of bleached bone and shrouded in sinew-thin robes of frozen rags. In one hand, the antlered warlord bore a lantern glowing with unnatural blue flame. In the other, a spear carved from mammoth tusk. Robb's voice was steel. "Ride no further. You will face Winterfell's wrath." The warlord laughed. A sound like cracking ice. He raised the lantern, and from its glow emerged pale shapes. Ice wraiths, their bodies flickering, eyes burning with cold hunger. Bran, who had followed at the rear, stepped forward. He placed a hand on his brother's shoulder. "Hold your lines," he instructed, voice calm despite the horror before them. Closing his eyes, he reached outward, drawing from the old wards he had bound to ice and flame. Power thrummed in his veins, ancient, fierce. He drew his free hand across the air, tracing a rune of warding. At his gesture, the spectral warriors hesitated, their forms flickering. Then, together, Robb and the Stark riders charged. Steel met ethereal chill as swords swung through half-solid foes. Blades passed harmlessly, but every strike shattered the wraith's cohesion when powered by Bran's wards. Corin's arrows flew true, each tipped with enchanted waters from the Frostfire cavern, bursting upon contact with ghostly cry. The warlord howled and hurled his spear. Bran met it with a thrust of will, sending the weapon tumbling useless. Spinning, he drew a dagger inscribed with weirwood runes, a gift from the Children's Grove, and sprang forward. He plunged blade into air, but this time the warded steel met flesh. The warlord's own heart of ice. The creature shuddered, its lantern flame guttering as the wraiths wailed and dissolved into motes of drifting snow. Silence fell. The riders fled into the trees, leaving broken lances and shattered bone. The Starks gathered, panting, hearts pounding with both fear and triumph. Robb sheathed his sword and met Bran's eyes. "You led us again, brother." Bran nodded, blood pounding in his ears. "Let us tend the wounded and return to Winterfell. The threat has grown bolder. Others will follow." They rode back through the darkening forest. The wounded carried on litters of pine. As Winterfell's towers gleamed ahead, Bran allowed himself a moment's weariness. He had faced ancient powers, drawn on magics older than any man. And even now he felt the cost in every breath. Within Winterfell's gates, lanterns burned bright. Maester Luwin had set up a field infirmary in the yard, and the wounded were tended by healers and septus. Lady Catelyn moved among them, her calm presence a balm. Arya and Rickon helped carry water and blankets. Robb oversaw the guard changes. That night, at the high table in the Great Hall, the Starks gathered once more. This time in full armor, the banners behind them, axes and swords at their sides. Catelyn rose, amber light catching in her eyes. "Tonight we celebrate another victory, but steel your hearts. The enemy that rides beneath the antlered wraith is not a simple raider. He is a herald of something darker still. Tomorrow we ride north again, to meet whatever comes, and to bury the threat before it consumes the north." "Then shall." Bran raised his goblet, voice unwavering. "To the old gods, who guide us still. To Winterfell, which stands unbroken. And to those who would challenge us, may they know the wrath of the wolf." Then Shashar. The goblets clinked, and beneath the vaulted roof of Winterfell's ancient hall, the heirs of House Stark sealed their vow. No darkness, however ancient or cruel, would overrun the north so long as the wolves held the land, and the boy who could not once walk had become its champion. Their war was only beginning, and Bran Stark knew that the trials ahead would demand every ounce of courage, cunning, and magic he possessed. But as the echo of their toast faded, he felt the old bonds tighten around him. Kinsfolk, bannermen, and Northmen united. And in that unity lay the hope that Winterfell, and all it protected, would endure whatever storm the frozen world would hurl at its gates. Kai. All. Snow fell gentle and silent upon Winterfell's highest towers, as though the old gods themselves wept in relief after the bloody clash at the Crannogman causeways. Bran Stark stood at the edge of the battlements beside Corin Halfhand, peering northward through the drifting flakes. In the lantern's glow, the crystalline hush turned the courtyard into a field of dancing embers. Below, torches flickered along the walls, and the banners of House Stark snapped softly, resolute against the dark. "We held them at the ford," Corin murmured. "Still, their warlord rides north, weaving wraiths around him like a cloak. I have never seen such power unchained." Bran nodded, breath condensing on the chill air. He lost his lantern, but he will find another source. The Frostfire spire's light may guide him still. He turned back toward the courtyard, where Robb Stark and Lady Catelyn awaited. The banners in the sky framed them like twin pillars of strength, one born of steel, the other of steel tempered by grief and love. Robb strode forward, cloak swirling. We must strike before their forces coalesce again. The northern passes lie open until the next full moon melts the high ice. After that, the Frostfangs will seal like a tomb. Lady Catelyn joined them. Her gown brushed with fresh snow. Eyes steady. The clans of the Neck will march with us. We have their loyalty. And Deepwood Moat readies its galleys to block any naval approach. Let our attack be swift and sudden. She looked to Bran. Your counsel, son. Bran's gaze found the distant silhouette of the wall. White, silent, its stone ringing with ancient magic. We ride at dawn. We take the route through the Wolf's Wood, then strike across the frozen river at its thinnest point, where our warded runes can collapse the ice beneath them. The wildlings will have no place to retreat, and their warlord will be isolated. Qhorin grunted approval. Then we call the banners tonight. Every man-at-arms at the gate, every Crannogman scout in the marsh. And now all. Robb clasped his brother's shoulder. Your sight has been our compass, Bran. We follow where you lead. The feast in the great hall that night was solemn and spirited by turn. Hearth fires glowed low, and the banners of the Stark sigil, direwolf heads leaping across steel gray, lined the walls. The long wooden tables bore platters of roast venison, bowls of root stew spiced with juniper berries, and loaves of dense brown bread. Ale flowed in pewter tankards, and wine warmed Lady Catelyn's cup as she presided at the high table. Bran sat between Robb and Arya, Rickon at his knee. Cregan Stark and Lord Glover flanked the table, their faces lined by years of war and winter's cruelty. Maester Luwayne quietly advised with parchments and quills, while Qhorin Halfhand, still blood-streaked from the day's skirmish, leaned in to whisper with Robb about scouting reports. When the last horn of ale was poured, Crispin Stark, Banner Knight of House Karstark, rose. His voice echoed in the vaulted chamber. In honor of our fallen comrades at the ford, I propose a toast, to those who guard the north, that they may have shelter beyond the wall, and to those who guard the south, that they may never fear the darkness again. His tankard lifted high, and the hall rang with clamor. Bran stood as well, voice steady and clear. To the north, he cried. To the wolves of Winterfell, may our bonds of blood and magic hold fast against all the night can bring. A roar answered him, then quiet fell once more. All eyes turned to him, glowing with firelight. Tomorrow, he continued, we ride into the Wolf's Wood, through frozen trees and haunted hollows, guided by the old words we have forged. We ride to break the power of the antlered warlord, and to banish the wraiths that cling to his darkness. Ride with courage, Stark's men, and know that Winterfell stands behind you. Every hearth, every bannerman, and every king under the mountain of snow. Robb drew his sword and tapped its pommel thrice on the board. To Winterfell, he proclaimed. Again the hall rose in tumult, cups clattering, voices raised as one. At dawn's first pale light, the Stark forces mustered in the courtyard. Some 300 mounted riders, clad in black and gray, their cloaks secured against flakes of driven snow, formed ranks before the gates. House Glover's Crannogman scouts, pale as marsh mist, moved among them, faces hidden beneath leather masks carved with frog motifs. Around the walls, archers stood ready upon walkways, longbows strung and arrows fletched with white and gray. The horn of Deepwood Moat sounded, low and resonant, and ravens took flight from the eastern towers toward the Wolf's Wood, carrying messages to the scouts there. Bran stood at the head of an inner circle, his legs unsteady but determined, the echoes of Frozen Cradle and Frostfire spire lingering in his blood. Robb rode in beside him, axe in hand, flanked by Cregan and Qhorin. Arya, now wearing a pauldron of leather studded with direwolf heads, mounted her horse with a grace born of many lessons. Rickon's black cloak fluttered as he vaulted into his saddle. His sword was a child's size but keen as his wit. Remember the wards, Bran called. When we reach the river, I will draw the runes. Hold the line, Let no man break through. Robb nodded. Stark and surviving forever. They charged through the gates, hoofbeats ringing on cobblestones slick with melting snow. As they passed under the portcullis, the walls of Winterfell shuddered. Not with weakness, but with promise. A fortress girded by magic and men. The trail into the Wolfswood wound beneath ancient trees, whose branches formed arched tunnels overhead. The snow lay soft, muffling the horses' passage, save where rotting leaves and fallen pine boughs gave way to patches of ice. Winter's breath still lingered in every hollow. Even the wind seemed reluctant to disturb the silence. Bran urged his horse forward, following the paths he had marked weeks before. The Crannogman scouts flanked them to east and west, sending back word by whisper of horn. Qhorin Halfhand rode ahead, blade sheathed, scanning for traps or ambush. Robb and Cregan rode to Bran's rear, their eyes hard and watchful. After an hour's cautious advance, they reached the banks of the Blackwater Rush. A broad river freezing inch by inch, its surface glassy and treacherous. At the heart of the crossing lay a shallow ford, marked by stones smooth as bone. Here, beneath the icy crust, the water still flowed swift and cold. Bran touched the haft of his sword and slipped from his saddle. He knelt at the water's edge, closing his eyes and drawing deep upon the words he had woven with frost and flame. The runes traced themselves across his palms, old symbols of sealing and binding. He pressed each hand against the ice, murmuring the first men's tongue in low chant. A faint glow flickered beneath his skin, like veins of moonlight. Around him the riders dismounted, bracing for the shock. Qhorin slid heavy shield and sword free, while Robb readied his longsword. Cregan and the Crannogman spread out, securing flanks. Horses snorted softly, their breath mingling with the river's gentle rush beneath the ice. Bran's voice rose, carrying the weight of runes and oaths. By frost and fire, I bind this passage. Let it hold the wicked and guide the free. At his final word, the ice around the ford quivered, then shattered. A spray of diamonds erupted as the surface cracked in fractal patterns. The river below roared to life, plunging away beneath the fractured panels. One after another, the Stark forces dashed across the newly widened ford, horses leaping from solid to solid as the edges collapsed behind them. In the confusion, shapes emerged on the far bank. Warlord and wraiths, gaunt and glimmering. The Stark riders formed shield wall at the river's edge. Steel meeting spectral chill as wraiths whirled forward. Robb's sword rang as he cleaved at ghostly limbs, and Qhorin's axe bit deep into mist-shrouded flesh. Cregan roared and drove his spear through the first wraith to slip through the gap. Arya and Rickon fought side by side, daggers flashing, cutting through pale forms until they vanished like smoke. Bran held back, chanting quietly as he watched the battle. His sight flared within him. Visions of the Frostfire Spire, the Children's Grove, the crypts beneath the wall. He summoned the power of the runes, letting it flow outward in a pulse that rippled across the battlefield. The water's edge hissed. The ground trembled. The wraiths faltered, their forms flickering uncertainly. At that moment, the warlord himself strode into view. Tall, antler horn rising like a crown, robes trailing in a phantom wind. His lantern burned anew at his side, a blue flame that danced with malice. He raised a hand, and two wraiths darted toward Bran. Swift, venomous. Robb lunged, intercepting one with a blow that shattered it into motes of ice. Qhorin struck the other down with battle-axe, but the warlord advanced, lantern light chasing away shadows, his antlers gleaming like jagged stars. Bran met his gaze. "You have no place here," he declared, his voice carrying across clamor of clashing steel. He stepped forward, footing firm in the rushing water. "Leave the north, or be bound forever beneath the ice." The warlord laughed, an echo that split the air. He raised the lantern high, and the frost around it thickened, tendrils of blue fire licking outward. The ground froze where the light touched. Horses skittered backward. Bran inhaled, drawing the ward's strength deep into his chest, then unleashed it in a roar of will. A wave of light and cold burst from him, colliding with the lantern's flame. For a heartbeat the river stood still. The flow paused. The battle stilled. Two forces of ice and fire locked in sudden peace. Then the lantern cracked, its flames sputtered, and with a final screeching crack it shattered. Blue flame collapsed in on itself, extinguished as though suffocated by the ward's power. The warlord staggered, eyes wide, his robes flickering between flesh and mist. Bran advanced upon him, dagger raised. This land belongs to the living. He struck true, the weirwood runed steel passing clean through the creature's heart of ice. The warlord cried out, a sound like glaciers splitting, and melted into shards of frost. Behind him, the remaining wraiths screamed, their cohesion broken. They scattered into drifting flurries, then blew away on the wind like chaff. The Stark riders exhaled in unison, swords lowered, eyes bright with disbelief. Robb clasped Bran's arm, voice husky. You saved us all, brother. Bran's legs trembled from the effort, but he lifted himself tall. Let none say a boy cannot change the night. He turned to Robb and the captains. Gather the survivors. We return to Winterfell. Let this crossing remain sealed until the spring thaw. No wraith may rise again here. They rode back beneath the pale light of morning. The ford behind them cracked and sealed by fallen ice. The Wolfswood's hush seemed deeper now, as though the forest itself acknowledged that the north had kept its own. As Winterfell's towers came into sight, he rose battered but unbowed. The banners of House Stark flew proud against the sky. In the courtyard, Lady Catelyn awaited, her cloak wrapped tight, eyes flooded with relief as each rider returned. Robb embraced her with one arm, holding his sword in the other. Bran rode up beside them, the memory of the battle etched in his gaze, but the old fire shining bright. You have done what no man thought possible, Catelyn whispered to Bran, voice trembling. You have broken the wraiths and banished their warlord. Bran dismounted, bowing his head. The words did their work, and the strength of Stark blood held true. He looked north, lips curving in a faint smile. Winter has one last grip upon us, but soon the thaw will come. Let the north know, we stand unbroken. Robb lifted his sword, and the courtyard rang with the clash of steel against shield as the Stark riders saluted. The crowds in the stands cheered, the small folk waved, ravens circled overhead, and the banners snapped proudly against the pale light. In that moment, as the promise of spring hovered on the wind, Bran felt the fullness of victory, hard-won and sacred. He had walked through ice and flame, woven magic older than any man, and returned a champion of Winterfell. Yet he knew the war for the North was not ended. Threats would rise again, tides would turn, seasons would shift. But as long as the Stark heart beat within his chest, and as long as the old words remained, Winterfell would stand, its walls unbroken, its spirit unyielding, its wolf-born children ever watchful beneath the silent watch of the old gods. Ka Wanja. A long-past hush lingered over Winterfell as the last echoes of battle faded into the thawing earth. In the days that followed, the castle stirred with a new tide of activity. Blacksmiths hammered fresh blades in the forges near the godswood. Septas and septons opened their shrines to bless the returning bannermen and common folk alike, and ravens flew southward to carry word of the Starks' triumph and their vigilance against the darkness. Bran Stark moved through these halls like a silent spirit of renewal. His legs, once crippled, bore him with deliberate steps. His voice carried the firm cadence of authority, earned by steel and ancient magic alike. He met with Maester Luwin each morning to master every scrap of knowledge about wards, runes, and old tongues, for he knew that Winterfell's safety now depended upon his command as much as on the walls themselves. At midday he sat with Lady Catelyn in the solar, parchments spread between them, where they sorted through Raven's letters from Deepwood Motte, Greywater Watch, White Harbor, and beyond. Each missive spoke of renewed loyalty, of men and women eager to serve under the sigil of winter, and of concerns that the antlered warlord's last lantern might yet blaze in other hands. In the afternoons, Bran rode the walls with Jon Snow of the Night's Watch, newly come south to stand guard in the broad daylight. Jon, whose own trials had tempered him, listened intently as Bran explained the pattern of words woven into the stones, feeling the pulse of hidden runes beneath his palm. Together they inspected the parapets where winter's frost still clung, tracing the paths through which the ice wraiths had tried to creep, and could no longer pass. Down in the yards, Arya Stark led training drills for the castle guard, and the small folk who had taken up spear and bow in the wake of the invasion. With Rickon at her side, she guided their feet through the same stances she had learned in the frozen cradle. Guards against spectral claws, against weapons born of nightmare. Each night, they lit lanterns at the gates and along the marsh paths, turning the darkness itself into a friendlier, watchful canopy. Robb Stark, now Lord of Winterfell in all but name, presided over the Great Hall each evening, receiving envoys and bannermen with the calm command of a true war leader. He hosted discussions on forging alliances with House Reed and House Mormont, and on sending diplomatic missions south to King's Landing, if only to show that Winterfell, though battered, still stood strong beneath its banners. In the midst of it all, he found time to spar with Corin half-hand on the courtyard sands, steel ringing against steel as they honed the young lord's skill for the conflicts yet to come. Lady Catelyn devoted her hours to the small folk, visiting the infirmary where the wounded recovered, comforting the families who had lost sons and daughters, and overseeing the distribution of preserved stores saved for the lean months of winter. She opened the crypts beneath the godswood to offer prayers at the weirwood's ancient roots, laying fresh offerings of pine cones and flickering candles upon its stone altar. Through it all, Bran felt the land's slow breath returning. Streams bubbled clear through the melting ice. Buds winked open on scrubby hedges. A lone stag wandered onto the courtyard lawn, blinking in the midday sun. He accompanied Cregan Stark and Lord Glover on a horse-borne tour beyond the outer walls, crossing the Milkwater Ford once more, this time to inspect the hidden pits now filled in, leaving only a smooth clearing that might bear winter's weight again, without fear. Cranagman scouts led the way through the marsh, their soft-footed gait revealing hidden channels where the river's current ran deep and swift. At each crossing, Bran paused to touch the water and whisper a word of binding, ensuring the land itself remembered who held sway here. On a dawn pierced by pale pink light, a great assembly gathered on the frozen courtyard. Banners of House Stark, House Manderly, House Glover, House Karstark, and the Cranagman's frog standard fluttered overhead. Robb raised his voice in greeting. Lady Catelyn welcomed dignitaries from White Harbor by Raven. Cregan announced the creation of a new pact, the Northern Compact, binding every northeastern house in mutual defense against threats both mortal and spectral. Bran spoke last, his tone measured but passionate. He recounted the story of the frozen cradle and the Frostfire Spire, of the wards laid beneath ice and the runes inscribed in flame, urging unity between the clans of the Neck, the Lords of the Woods, and the Brothers of the Night's Watch. When he finished, a cheer rose that shook the battlements and carried out across the snowfields beyond. Yet that very night, under a waning moon, a silent shadow slipped past the Cranagman's watchfires. One lone rider, cloaked in gray furs, emerged from the Wolfswood path, an emissary bearing a single raven-tipped arrow tied with a strand of stark white hair. He spurred his mount through the outer gate unseen and disappeared into the winding streets of Wintertown. By morning, the arrow lay upon the steps of the Great Hall, unloosed and unbroken, with a scrap of parchment bearing 3 simple words scrawled in ink as red as fresh blood. Winter's end kills. Robb and Cregan convened an immediate circle of war in the godswood beneath the naked branches of the weirwood, where Maester Luwin's lanterns glimmered like wary eyes. Bran placed his hand on the weirwood's ancient trunk and closed his eyes, reaching out with that inner sight that had guided them north. He felt the pang of fear that had driven the messenger through the town's sleeping lanes. He tasted the faint heat of blood upon the wind. He saw the ghostly reflection of hair like spun frost. And he knew the fight was far from over. "Summon the scouts," he directed, voice calm as a glacier's surface. "They will find this shadow, and they will bring him here." Then Tao. So the chase began anew. Riders dashed eastward into the marsh. Spear points glinted under the crimson-tinged sunrise as tracking parties scoured the Wolfswood paths. Ravens winged toward the wall with pleas for swift riders to scour the inner passages for signs of wraithly stirrings. In the midst of it all, Bran Stark stood firm, the wards of Winterfell and the knowledge of ancient magic girding his heart. For he had learned that darkness may come again, may ride in human guise, or slip through thawed paths. But the North had a guardian born of ice and flame, and a boy once bound to a bed, now risen as champion of Winterfell and all her people. And as the first crocus dared to push through the melting frost, it stood as testament to a land refusing to yield, to a family bound by blood and honor, and to a watcher who would not rest until no shadow dared threaten the wolf of the North. Deep in the wolf's wood, the riders of Winterfell moved like shadows beneath tangled boughs, the howl of ravens echoing faintly overhead as watchfires flared in hidden hollows. Bran Stark led the pursuit, stealthy as a direwolf, his cloak of gray blending with bark and moss. Each hoofbeat on frozen leaf-strewn earth carried him closer to the rider who had dared strike at the Stark heart, carrying a message of blood and threat that chilled even the warmth of winter's last sunlight. They tracked him by broken twigs, by the faint drag of an errant foot dragging in thawing mud, and by the single ribbon of white hair fluttering from a branch like a ghostly banner. Qhorin Halfhand flanked Bran, silent blade at his side. Arya and Rickon took point, their steps sure, eyes burning with the same fierce determination that had driven them through the Frostfire cavern. By midday they emerged into a clearing ringed with ancient oaks, their roots twisted like gnarled fingers around moss-cushioned stones. There, horses stamped impatiently beside a lone rider whose cloak bore no banner, only the stains of night's ride and the tremor of fear riding in his eyes. He reined in before Bran's small circle of Stark riders, hands raised. Snow fell slow as clockwork, each flake drifting through the hush. Bran stepped forward. "Who are you? And why do you bring this threat to Winterfell?" His voice carried the authority of the wall's wards, of frozen runes bound in flame, of every victory won beneath northern stars. The rider knelt, tugging at his cloak to reveal a neck marked by nettle rash and bruised by cold. "I serve no warlord," he rasped, gaze darting beneath his hood. "I fled the camp beyond Milkwater. Their leader rides east now, gathering the clans of the Western Neck, men corrupted by dark promises of power. They hunt the Stark heirs, seek to strike while your walls guard only the north and east gates." He pressed a small leather pouch into Arya's hand. Inside lay a single weirwood leaf carved from red jasper. His seal. He bowed his head. "He sent me with this message, risking my life that you might know the threat grows." Bran took the token, fingertips tracing its carved veins. He felt its weight like a pulse, unyielding, ancient. He plans a two-pronged strike, he realized. While we guard the east and south, he will come through the western marshes and strike at Winterfell's watchtower. He met Arya's eyes. "You must ride ahead to the tower at Wolf's Den. Warn the garrison. Prepare the wards there. To Rickon, and you, ride to the Crannogman's hidden causeway. Tell them we will need their aid to block the western approach." "No." Arya sprang to her horse, cloak swirling. "I will not fail." Rickon nodded fiercely, spurring his mount northward without another word. Bran mounted beside Qhorin. "We will confront this warlord ourselves. Robb must hold the castle. Cregan must marshal the banners. Here we strike at the heart of the threat." They rode as one through the oaks, branches clawing at cloaks, until they reached a marsh so tangled that horses stumbled at every step. Qhorin raised a hand, and Bran whispered an invocation to the old wards. Soft, compelling. The brambles and reeds parted, forming a narrow path, slick with black water and tufts of bulrush. Beneath their feet, a current ran hidden, its undercurrent pulling at the soft earth. At the path's end lay a low hill, crowned by a ring of upright stones, carved with the twisted marks of the first men. Here, the warlord's camp lay nestled like a carcass in the marsh. 5 long houses of interlaced wood and sod, smoke rising in thin blue columns, and the faint crackle of torches within. Wraith song drifted on the wind, a hiss of broken ice and hungry longing. Bran slid from his saddle. "The wards here are weak," he said. "We must break through silently, using the cover of the old grove." He led Corin and 2 hand-picked riders into the ring of standing stones. Their carvings glowed faintly, acknowledging his presence. Beneath the central monolith, a shallow pit had been filled with sacrificial runes and ghostly ichor, proof that the warlord's dark magic had already begun to bind the land. He knelt beside the stones, running a dagger inscribed with weirwood runes along the carved roots. "Undo this," he murmured, voice low. "Unbind what is not ours to hold." A pulse of frost leapt from the blade into the pit. The ichor cracked like ice, steam hissing, and the runes collapsed into dust. Wraithsong faltered, then fell silent. Corin gripped Bran's shoulder. "They will know we came." Bran rose. "Let them come, unprepared." They circled the camp, advancing on silent feet. A guard slouched atop the longhouse roof, lantern in hand. Corin threw a small dart of weirwood-sharpened steel. It struck true, and the guard fell without a cry. The others paused, alarm flashing in torchlight. Bran gave the signal, a horn note low as distant thunder. Then the ward flare, blue-white fire that burst from his palms, illuminating the longhouses in a burst of eerie radiance. The warlord emerged, antlers gleaming, spear in hand. Lantern gone but eyes alight with malice. "Boy of Winterfell," he hissed, voice like cracking ice. "You threaten the greater design." Bran met his gaze. "The greater design ends tonight." They clashed beneath the monoliths. Warlord's spear against Bran's dagger. Magic against magic. Steel against spectral bone. Corin and the riders fought the cultists at the longhouse doors. Men marked by black vows, clad in swamp wrappings, each wielding rusted blades. Arya's horn answered from the east. She and Robb's archers had shattered the camp's flank. Rickon's cry rose from the north. Crannogmen thrust through the reeds, flanking the surprised guard. Amid the chaos, Bran and the warlord's duel raged. The ground beneath them cracked, fissures opening like hungry mouths. Each strike of the warlord's spear left frost-laced scars on the earth. Each retort of Bran's dagger burned away shadows. The warlord howled and swung his antler crown like a mace. Bran parried, then drove his blade through the creature's chest. Its antlers cracked, lantern smoke curling, and with a final shriek, the warlord's form shattered into shards of ice that skittered across the earth, dissolving in steam. Silence followed. Cultists surrendered at sword point. Wraiths fled through newly opened crevices in the marsh, and the monoliths lay dark once more. Corin sheathed his blade. "It is done." Bran stood among the broken runes and shattered dark magics, chest heaving. "Let Winterfell's walls be hardened again," he said. "Let every gate be warded, every tower sealed with weirwood and ice-ruined steel. Tonight we ride home. Tomorrow we rebuild." They gathered the cultists, 20 in all, and bound them for Robb's justice. The riders led the Crannogmen's boats back through the reeds. Arya and Rickon rode beside them, triumphant. As dawn rose over Winterfell, the last shadows retreated into the Wolfswood, and the marsh exhaled its mists of calm. Back within the gates, Lady Catelyn greeted them with tears and relief. Robb embraced Bran fiercely. "You have saved us all yet again," he whispered. Bran met her gaze. "Winterfell endures." And in that promise lay the heart of the North, a land bound by blood and ancient magic, guarded by a boy who had risen on unfaltering legs, whose spirit would stand unbowed against any darkness that dared cross the Wolfswood, or the Wall, so long as the wards of Winterfell held and the wolf's heart beat beneath its banners. Na. The wolves of Winterfell slept uneasily that night, sensing in the shifting wind that the war against Shadow was only beginning. Dawn, when it came, found Bran Stark standing once more upon the walls, gray cloak drawn tight around his shoulders, and eyes fixed on distant horizons where the Wolfswood met the rising sun. Behind him, the banners of the Northern Compact snapped proudly. Deery wolves, fishhooks, frogs, and the proud fist of Karstark united in purpose. He did not turn as Robb approached, But when his brother fell into step at his side, Bran felt the familiar warmth of kinship steady him. "You rest now," Robb said quietly. "Your wounds have mostly healed. Let the maesters tend the last of them." Bran shook his head. "My body has done its part. The true work lies ahead." The small folk look to Winterfell for protection. Lord Glover brings word that Deepwood Motte fears another raid by cult remnants. The Crannogmen report strange lights across the southern marshes, and the rangers of Castle Black still patrol the tunnels beneath the wall, where they whisper of deeper stirrings. Robb glanced over the battlements at the courtyard below, where steel rang as smiths reforged weapons and archers drilled new recruits. "Then we call another council. Let every captain of the North ride here by dusk." Bran closed his eyes and reached out with that inner sight he had honed among ice and flame. He felt the pulse of Winterfell's wards, the heartbeat of the wall, and the slow, powerful rhythms of the land itself. Beneath his feet, roots shifted quietly in greeting. Overhead, ravens wheeled in vigilant arcs. He smiled, however faintly. "Yes. Tonight, we bind our defenses anew. We remind our allies that Winterfell's watch never ends." In the great hall that evening, banners of every northern house hung side by side. Stark, Manderley, Glover, Karstark, Reed, Mormont, and the marsh-worn standard of House Tallheart. Around the high table sat Lord Cragen Stark, Lady Catelyn, Robb, and Maester Luwin. Cernan Reed and Mage Mormont took their places on either side, while old Sir Downy Manderley tapped his fingers on the oaken board, eager for news. Bran entered between Robb and Corran, drawing respectful bows from every captain. He took his seat at the center, the memory of every victory, at the frozen cradle, the Frostfire spire, the Milkwater ford, and the Wolfswood camp, etched in the steel lines of his face. When the hushed gathering turned to him, he spoke. "Lords and ladies of the North, and brothers of the Watch, we have faced darkness together and driven it back time and again. But the shadow lives on, and it has learned. It shifts in human guise, in whispered cults, in flickering lantern fire. We must remain as relentless as the seasons, as unyielding as the wall itself." Bentrain. He laid before them a map etched with wards and runic sigils. "Here," he pointed to Winterfell's walls and the surrounding lands, "we will inscribe ice runes of binding. Here," he traced the Wolfswood Ridge, "we will harvest weirwood sap to renew the old gods' wards in every hidden grove. Here," he touched the next marshland, "we call upon the Crannogmen's secret paths to scout and ambush. And here," he finished at the wall's shadowed face, "we send seasoned rangers of Castle Black to reinforce the tunnels and catacombs." Lady Catelyn rose. "And what of the river? The thaw will come, and melter floods could carry wraiths downstream." Bran met her fiercely. "We harness the river itself. We set floating runes, woven into sluice gates, that will trap any spectral form in coils of ice and flame. Let House Glover's smiths craft the iron fixtures, and let the men of Carhold and Torrhen square staff the watch stations." A chorus of assent rose among the captains. Lord Glover thumped the table. "We will begin at dawn," Cragen Stark added, "and we will host a tournament in 2 weeks. Let our people see that joy endures even in hard times." Bran inclined his head at that, for he understood that hope was as vital as steel. "Then let all our efforts begin in earnest. Winterfell's watch is eternal." At dawn's light, the courtyard seethed with activity. Blacksmiths hammered at anvil and forge, weaving runic bands of iron into gates and portcullises. Septons and septas carried lanterns burning with weirwood oil to every tower and watch post. Archers and spearmen drilled in tight formations, practicing maneuvers to counter spectral foes and human raiders alike. Bran moved among them, offering words of guidance. A whispered correction here, a demonstration of rune inscription there. From atop the wall, he oversaw the engraving of ice runes along the battlements. Below, he watched the mapping of hidden posts in the Wolfswood. staffed by Reed's scouts. Along the Milkwater Ford, Crannogmen dug new sluice gates, their very steps weaving old magics into the earth. That afternoon, he rode north with Jon Snow and a company of rangers to inspect the catacombs beneath the wall. Torches flickered in vaulted halls carved from ancient stone, and the chill air bore faint echoes of oaths long sworn. Jon's eyes shone with quiet determination as he traced his hand along the carved runes that Bran had renewed. "These halls will stand," Jon said, voice echoing in the hush. "Neither wraith nor man will slip through unseen." Bran nodded. "And when the rangers ride out to shadowed lands, they will carry the words within their hearts." As the sun set over Winterfell's towers, the banners snapped against a sky bleeding red. In the Godswood, Bran gathered beneath the ancient weirwood, surrounded by Lady Catelyn, Robb, Corran, and the captains who would oversee each region's defenses. Torches burned on the altar, their flames casting shifting shadows on pale faces. Bran raised his hands above the carved trunk and spoke the old words. First men, children's tongue, and the silent language of wind and stone intertwine. The very wood pulsed in response, veins of sap turning silver in flames glow. One by one, each captain stepped forward and laid a hand upon the bark, pledging their service and renewing the ancient pact between Stark blood and the old gods. When the final oath was spoken, the wind sighed through the branches, and a single leaf drifted down to rest at Bran's feet. A weirwood leaf carved of living bark, shimmering with newfound promise. He lifted it, eyes shining. "So long as the old gods watch, and as long as we hold true, no darkness shall overrun the north." Behind him, the torches crackled, and the Night's Watch drummer began a slow, steady beat, an echo that would carry beyond the Godswood, across snowfields and stone, to every outpost of the north. In that rhythm lay the heartbeat of a land unbowed. And thus, under crimson sky and ancient boughs, Winterfell's heirs sealed their vow anew, that the Wolf of the North would stand guard forever, fierce and watchful, upon ice and flame.